The blizzard had buried Millbrook, Colorado under 6 in of silence. Carter Williams and his German shepherd, Rex, trudged through the pre-dawn darkness at 5:30, their breath ghosting in the frozen air. Rex suddenly erupted into frantic barking, clawing at the snow near Old Creek Bridge with desperate intensity. Carter's heart hammered as he brushed away the white powder. A police cruiser lay crushed and overturned, blood painting the pristine snow in crimson streaks. Inside the twisted metal, a female officer hung motionless from her seatbelt, her face pale as the snow itself, lips blue with cold. "Officer Hayes, badge number 247, she whispered through chattering teeth before her eyes rolled back. But as Carter reached to pull her free, Rex froze mid-bark, his entire body going rigid as stone. The dog's yellow eyes locked onto the dark tree-line behind them, hackles rising, a low growl rumbling from his throat. In that deadly silence, Carter realized they weren't alone. Carter's hands shook as he yanked open the crumpled driver's door, metal shrieking against metal. The woman's uniform was soaked through, her badge catching what little moonlight filtered through the storm clouds. Her breathing came in shallow puffs that barely fogged the frigid air. Rex circled them now, ears flattened, nose working frantically, as if picking up scents that didn't belong in their quiet morning routine. Carter had carried wounded soldiers before, but his hands felt clumsy in the thick gloves as he worked to unbuckle her seatbelt. "Can you hear me?" he whispered, his voice swallowed by the falling snow. No response, just the soft whisper of snowflakes hitting the ground and Rex's continued low growling. The dog kept glancing between the unconscious officer and the woods, his body language screaming danger in a way that made Carter's military instincts flare to life. Something was wrong beyond the obvious crash. The hairs on Carter's neck prickled as he lifted the woman's limp form, her head lolling against his shoulder. The trek back to his house felt endless, his boots sinking deep into the fresh powder with each step. Rex led the way, constantly checking behind them, his black nose cutting through the air like a radar dish. The woman's breathing grew more labored against Carter's chest, and he quickened his pace despite the burning in his lungs. His small ranch house appeared through the swirling white like a beacon, windows glowing warm yellow against the pre-dawn darkness. Behind them, the forest remained ominously still. Inside, Carter laid the officer on his worn leather couch near the stone fireplace, its embers still glowing from the night before. Rex positioned himself by the front window, alert and tense, occasionally whining softly. Carter grabbed towels from the bathroom, his movements automatic from years of single parenthood and crisis management. The woman's skin felt like ice beneath his fingers as he checked for other injuries. A nasty gash on her forehead had stopped bleeding, but dried blood matted her dark hair. Her name tag read J. Hayes in bold black letters. 7-year-old Benny appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His superhero pajamas hung loose on his small frame, and his sandy hair stuck up at odd angles. "Dad, what's happening? Why is Rex acting weird?" The boy's voice carried that particular note of worry that always made Carter's chest tighten. Rex glanced at Benny but didn't leave his post by the window, tail rigid and still. The dog's unusual behavior wasn't lost on the observant child, who had grown used to Rex's normally gentle demeanor around the house. "There was an accident, buddy. This lady needs help." Carter kept his voice steady as he wrapped the woman in his heaviest blanket, the one Melissa had crocheted during her final winter. The officer stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering, and Carter felt a surge of relief. Her lips moved soundlessly before her eyes opened. Unfocused and glazed, she tried to sit up immediately, wincing and pressing a hand to her head. Rex abandoned his window post and approached the couch, sniffing carefully at the woman's outstretched hand. "Easy there. You were in a car accident." Carter's voice carried the gentle authority he'd learned from years of calming, frightened patients at the garage and scared children in his own home. The woman's eyes gradually focused on his face, then swept around the unfamiliar room. She took in the rustic furniture, the family photos on the mantel, Benny hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Rex sat beside the couch now, head tilted in an almost protective posture that struck Carter as odd for a dog who usually cowered at the sight of uniforms. "I'm Joanna," she said finally, voice and barely above a whisper. "Officer Joanna Hayes, badge number 247. She repeated the information like a mantra, as if afraid she might forget. Carter noticed she avoided looking directly at Rex, though the dog's presence seemed to calm her in some indefinable way. Her hands trembled as she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending spirals of snow against the glass. Carter moved to the kitchen, muscle memory guiding him through the familiar routine of brewing coffee and heating milk for hot chocolate. Through the open doorway, he watched Joanna's interaction with Benny, who had crept closer, despite his father's unspoken warning to keep his distance. The boy's natural curiosity trumped caution, as it often did. Rex remained at the woman's side, occasionally glancing toward the windows with that same alert tension. The dog's behavior nagged at Carter's consciousness, like a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. "You have a gun," Benny observed with the blunt honesty of childhood, pointing at Joanna's service weapon. She looked down at her holster, as if surprised to find it there, her expression flickering between confusion and something Carter couldn't quite identify. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Rex's ears pricked forward at Benny's words, and the dog's eyes tracked between the weapon and Joanna's face, with an intelligence that seemed almost human. The moment stretched uncomfortably before Joanna managed a weak smile. "It's part of my job, sweetheart, like how your dad probably has tools for fixing cars." Her voice grew stronger, more controlled, but Carter caught the slight tremor underneath. She accepted the mug of hot chocolate Carter offered, wrapping both hands around it, as if anchoring herself to something solid. Steam rose from the liquid, momentarily fogging the lower part of her face. Rex settled at her feet with a soft sigh, finally relaxing for the first time since they'd found her. The radio crackled from Joanna's duty belt, making all of them jump. Dispatch was calling for units to respond to various incidents around the county, the tiny voice echoing strangely in the warm living room. Joanna made no move to respond, staring into her hot chocolate with an expression Carter recognized from his own mirror during the darkest days after Melissa's death. Rex's head snapped up at the radio sounds, and that familiar trembling started in his hindquarters. The dog had never responded well to official radio chatter or sirens. "Shouldn't you check in with them?" Carter asked carefully, settling into the armchair across from her. Joanna's grip tightened on the mug, her knuckles whitening. She shook her head slowly, dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. Benny climbed onto the arm of Carter's chair, sensing the tension in the room, with a child's uncanny ability to read adult emotions. The fire crackled in the grate, the only sound besides the wind and the occasional squawk from Joanna's radio. "I need to think first, figure out what happened." Joanna's words came out measured, deliberate, but Carter heard the underlying uncertainty. "The roads are too dangerous anyway. No point in more people getting hurt trying to reach me." She looked directly at Rex for the first time, and the dog's tail thumped once against the floor. Something passed between them, some recognition that made Carter's instincts prickle again. The woman who'd nearly died in the snow was studying his rescue dog with the intensity of someone seeing a ghost. Morning light began filtering through the storm clouds, casting the snow-covered landscape in shades of blue and gray. The blizzard showed no signs of letting up, and the radio reported multiple accidents and road closures throughout the county. Carter found himself studying Joanna's profile as she stared out at the window, noting the way her hand unconsciously moved to Rex's head when the dog leaned against her legs. For an animal that typically shied away from strangers in uniform, Rex's behavior struck him as completely out of character. Rex doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly. Carter mentioned casually, testing the waters. Joanna's hand stilled on the dog's fur, and she turned to look at him with eyes that seemed older than her years. There was knowledge there, and pain, and something else that made Carter think of soldiers who'd seen too much combat. Rex went softly and pushed his muzzle into her palm, a gesture of comfort the dog had only ever shown to Carter and Benny during their worst moments. "I had a dog like him once. Same breed, same coloring." Joanna's voice carried a weight that spoke of loss and grief barely held in check. 2 years ago, he was killed." The last words came out barely audible, and Rex's whine grew more insistent. Carter felt pieces of a puzzle shifting in his mind, connections forming that didn't quite make sense yet. The timeline felt wrong somehow, but he couldn't put his finger on why. Benny slipped down from the chair arm and approached Joanna with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "What was his name, your dog?" Rex's tail wagged as the boy settled cross-legged on the floor beside them, creating a small circle of warmth near the fireplace. Joanna's smile was genuine this time, touched with sadness but real. She reached out to ruffle Benny's hair with her free hand while continuing to pet Rex with the other. His name was Bruno. The hesitation was so brief Carter almost missed it, but Rex's ears flicked backward for just in heat. He was a good boy, loyal, protective. Her voice grew distant, and Carter noticed she was looking at Rex rather than at Benny while she spoke. The dog's behavior grew more animated, tail wagging faster, and he pressed closer against her legs as if trying to offer comfort for a loss that seemed to resonate in his bones. The wind died down outside, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the occasional crack of settling snow and the soft hiss of the fire. Carter's phone buzzed with a text message, probably someone from town checking on him, and Benny given the severity of the storm. He ignored it, caught up in watching the interaction between his rescued dog and this mysterious woman who'd literally crashed into their quiet morning. Rex was behaving like he'd found something precious that he'd thought was lost forever. Days passed in a strange domestic routine that felt both natural and surreal. The roads remained impossible, giving Joanna no choice but to stay in their guest room. Carter found himself looking forward to her presence at their small kitchen table each morning, coffee steaming between them, while Benny chatted about his dreams or the snow forts he planned to build. Rex had become her constant shadow, following her from room to room with devoted attention that both warmed Carter's heart and troubled his mind. But there were moments when Carter caught Joanna staring out windows with the alertness of someone expecting trouble. She checked the locks on doors she had no reason to worry about, and her hand often drifted unconsciously to her service weapon when unexpected sounds came from outside. Rex mirrored her vigilance, positioning himself between her and any potential threat, with protective instincts that seemed disproportionate for a dog who'd only known her a few days. "Are you running from something?" Carter asked one evening after Benny had gone to bed. They sat in the living room, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, while Rex dozed at Joanna's feet. Her hand still illed on the dog's fur, and Carter saw her shoulders tense beneath the borrowed sweater she wore. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing something raw and frightened underneath. "I don't know what you mean." But her voice lacked conviction, and she wouldn't meet his eyes. Rex lifted his head, sensing the shift in her emotional state, and placed his muzzle on her knee in a gesture of comfort. The dog's behavior continued to puzzle Carter. This immediate and intense bond with a stranger who claimed to be nothing more than an accident victim. Everything about the situation felt like pieces of a story that didn't quite fit together. Carter had learned to read people during his years in the military and his time as a single father navigating small-town politics. Joanna was hiding something significant, something that made her jump at unexpected sounds and caused her to unconsciously position herself with her back to walls. Rex's protective behavior suggested he sensed the same undercurrent of danger that Carter felt, but couldn't identify. The dog had been trained for protection once before whatever trauma had landed him in the rescue facility. The next morning brought a break in the weather, and a visitor Carter hadn't expected. Sheriff Rodriguez knocked on the door just after 8 a.m., his patrol car crunching through the snow in the driveway. Carter answered the door while Joanna retreated to the kitchen with Rex, both of them moving with a synchronization that spoke of practice. The sheriff's eyes swept the room as Carter invited him in, noting details with professional thoroughness. "Heard you had some excitement out here during the storm," Rodriguez said, accepting a cup of coffee and settling into the chair Carter offered. "Found an abandoned police cruiser down by Old Creek Bridge. Figured you might have seen something. Living so close." His tone was casual, friendly even, but Carter caught the way the man's eyes lingered on the muddy footprints by the door and the extra coffee mug on the counter. "Just the usual storm cleanup. Rex and I stick close to home when it's that bad outside." Carter kept his voice level, though he wasn't entirely sure why he was deflecting. Something about the sheriff's presence made Rex growl low in his throat from the kitchen doorway, hackles rising despite Joanna's restraining hand on his collar. The dog's reaction was immediate and visceral, the same protective stance he'd shown at the accident site. Rodriguez's radio crackled with routine chatter, and Carter noticed Joanna's sharp intake of breath from the kitchen. Rex's growling intensified, and the dog pulled against Joanna's grip. Every muscle in his body coiled for action. The sheriff glanced toward the kitchen doorway with renewed interest, his casual demeanor shifting subtly. Carter felt the atmosphere in the room change, tension ratcheting up like a wire being wound too tight. "Everything all right back there?" Rodriguez called out, half rising from his chair. Carter blocked his view of the kitchen with his body, instinctively positioning himself as a barrier. Rex's growling had become a continuous rumble now, and Carter could hear Joanna's soft voice trying to calm the agitated animal. The sheriff's hand drifted toward his service weapon, a movement so subtle Carter almost missed it. "Just the dog being territorial, he doesn't like strangers much." Carter's explanation fell flat even to his own ears, but Rodriguez nodded and settled back into his chair. The radio chatter continued, discussing routine patrol schedules and weather conditions, but Carter noticed the sheriff wasn't really listening. His attention remained focused on the kitchen doorway, where Rex's growling provided a constant undercurrent of menace. After Rodriguez left, promising to check in again soon, Carter found Joanna sitting at the kitchen table with Rex pressed against her legs. Her hands trembled as she held her coffee mug, and her face had gone pale beneath the fading bruises from the accident. The dog remained alert and agitated, ears pricked forward, and eyes fixed on the front door as if expecting imminent danger. "You want to tell me what that was about?" Carter asked gently, settling into the chair across from her. Joanna's eyes darted to the window, then to the door before finally meeting his gaze. Rex wed softly and pushed closer against her, offering comfort with his warm presence. The dog's behavior spoke volumes about bonds that ran deeper than a few days of acquaintance. "Not all cops can be trusted." The words came out flat and bitter, carrying a weight of experience that made Carter's chest tighten. "I learned that lesson 2 years ago. Rex knows it too." She looked down at the dog as she spoke, and Carter saw her facade finally cracking. This wasn't just about a car accident or storm delays. This was about survival, about running from something that had been chasing her for far too long. Rex's reaction to the sheriff had been immediate and protective, the response of a dog defending someone precious from a recognized threat. Carter thought about the timeline Joanna had mentioned, about the dog named Bruno who'd been killed 2 years ago, about Rex's mysterious past before the rescue center. The pieces were starting to form a picture that made his blood run cold with understanding. "Joanna," Carter said carefully, watching her face for reactions. "What really happened 2 years ago?" Rex's ears swiveled toward him at the question, and the dog's intelligent eyes seemed to hold secrets that went beyond normal canine understanding. Joanna's composure finally shattered completely, tears spilling down her cheeks as she buried her face in Rex's fur. "My husband was murdered," she whispered into the dog's coat. "Detective Trevor Murphy, K9 Unit. He and Rex were partners for 5 years before." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Carter felt the world shift around him as the final pieces clicked into place. Rex wasn't just any rescue dog. He was a retired police K9, traumatized by the loss of his partner and handler. The dog Carter had been caring for, the animal he'd watched bond instantly with this mysterious woman, wasn't responding to a stranger at all. Rex recognized Joanna because she was Trevor's wife, the woman he'd failed to protect when his partner was killed. The guilt and grief radiating from both woman and dog suddenly made perfect sense, as did Rex's protective behavior and his visceral reaction to Sheriff Rodriguez. Rex tried to save Trevor that night, but he couldn't. The trauma broke him, made him afraid of sirens and radios and uniforms, except mine. Joanna's voice grew stronger as she continued, her hand never stopping its gentle motion through Rex's fur. After Trevor died, they retired Rex early. Said he was too damaged for active duty. I couldn't keep him because looking at him reminded me of everything I'd lost. Carter sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what she'd revealed. Rex hadn't just lost a handler that night 2 years ago. He'd lost his purpose, his identity, his reason for existing. The dog had been living with survivor's guilt, just like any human who'd watched a partner die. No wonder he'd seemed so lost when Carter first brought him home, so desperate for a new family to protect. "But you found him again," Carter said softly, watching the reunion between woman and dog with new understanding. "Troy found you." Rex lifted his head from Joanna's lap and looked directly at Carter, tail wagging slowly as, if grateful to finally have his story understood. The dog had recognized Joanna the moment Carter pulled her from that wrecked patrol car. Had known immediately that fate had given him a second chance. I've been undercover for 18 months investigating the corruption that killed Trevor, building a case, gathering evidence, trying to prove that Sheriff Rodriguez and others were involved in drug trafficking. Joanna's confession came out in a rush now, as if holding the secrets had been poisoning her from the inside. But they figured out who I was. That accident wasn't an accident, Carter. They tried to kill me. The implications hit Carter like a physical blow. He and Benny weren't just harboring an injured police officer. They were protecting a federal witness whose life was in immediate danger. Rex's protective behavior, his constant vigilance, his reaction to Rodriguez's visit, all made perfect sense now. The dog was doing what he'd been trained to do, what he'd failed to do 2 years ago when his partner died. Outside, a car engine rumbled to life in the distance, the sound carrying clearly through the cold air. Rex's head snapped up instantly, ears pricked and body tense. Joanna's hand stilled on his fur, and Carter saw fear flood her features as she recognized the threat that had finally caught up with them. The reckoning they'd all been waiting for was about to begin. "Get Benny and go to the basement," Carter said quietly, already moving toward the gun cabinet in his bedroom. "Take Rex with you. Whatever happens, don't come upstairs until I call for you." His military training kicked in automatically, adrenaline sharpening his focus as he prepared to defend his family and the woman who'd brought both salvation and danger into their quiet lives. 3 vehicles crunched through the snow toward his house, their occupants no doubt armed and desperate, to silence the only witness who could expose their crimes. Carter checked his rifle and took position at the living room window, watching the men emerge from their cars with the purposeful movements of people who'd done this before. Rex's growling echoed from the basement, and Carter smiled grimly. They had no idea what they were walking into. The first shot shattered the front window, spraying glass across the hardwood floor where Benny had been playing with his toys just an hour earlier. Carter returned fire immediately, his shot punching through the windshield of the lead vehicle and sending the men diving for cover behind their cars. Rex's barking joined the gunfire, the dog's voice carrying a note of savage satisfaction that spoke of old scores being settled. "We just want the woman, Williams." Rodriguez's voice carried across the snowy yard, distorted by the cold air. "Give her up and we'll leave you and your boy alone." But Carter had heard similar lies in Afghanistan, knew exactly how much trust to place in the promises of desperate men. He cycled the bolt on his rifle and settled in for a siege, drawing on training he'd hoped never to use again. More shots rang out, splintering the wooden siding and punching holes in the walls of the home Carter had shared with Melissa, where he'd raised their son, where he'd built a life worth defending. Each bullet strengthened his resolve rather than weakening it. These men had already destroyed one family when they killed Trevor Murphy. They wouldn't destroy another on his watch. From the basement came the sound of Rex's frantic barking, mixed with Benny's frightened crying, and Joanna's soothing voice trying to calm them both. Carter's heart clenched at the terror in his son's voice, but he forced himself to focus on the immediate threat. The attackers were spreading out, trying to surround the house, and he needed to thin their numbers before they could coordinate a final assault. His next shot took down Rodriguez, the corrupt sheriff, spinning and falling into the snow with a cry of pain and rage. The remaining men opened up with automatic weapons, filling the air with lead and forcing Carter to take cover behind the stone fireplace. Chunks of masonry exploded around him, and he tasted dust and cordite in the air. Rex's barking grew more urgent from below, the dog's protective instincts screaming danger. The attack came from 2 directions simultaneously, exactly as Carter had expected from trained men. Glass exploded in the kitchen as someone came through the back door while another figure appeared in the shattered front window. Carter's military reflexes took over completely, muscle memory guiding him through actions he'd performed countless times in combat zones half a world away. His shotgun roared twice in quick succession, the heavy load stopping both attackers in their tracks. The house fell silent, except for the ringing in his ears and the soft whimpering of wounded men. Rex's barking had stopped too, replaced by an expectant quiet that suggested the immediate danger had passed. Carter moved carefully through his ruined home, checking each fallen man for weapons and signs of life. "It's over," He called down to the basement, his voice hollow from shouting and adrenaline. "They're down. It's safe now." Footsteps on the basement stairs announced Joanna's approach. Rex's claws clicking on the wooden steps as he bounded up to check on his new pack leader. The dog's tail wagged furiously when he saw Carter standing unheard among the wreckage, and he pressed against the man's legs in gratitude and relief. Benny emerged last, his face stray with tears but his eyes bright with the resilience of childhood. He looked around at the bullet holes and broken glass, with the sort of clinical interest that reminded Carter so much of Melissa. It made his chest ache. "Did the bad guys lose, Daddy?" the boy asked, slipping his small hand into Carter's larger one. Rex sat beside them both, finally at peace with his role as protector and guardian. "Yeah, buddy. The bad guys lost." Carter squeezed his son's hand gently, then looked at Joanna with eyes that held new understanding. "And the good guys won." Rex barked once in agreement, tail wagging as he looked between the three people who had become his new pack, his new purpose, his second chance at the life he'd thought was lost forever. The FBI agents who arrived 3 hours later found them sitting around the kitchen table sharing hot chocolate and stories. Rex sprawled contentedly across Joanna's feet, while Benny peppered her with questions about police work. The evidence she'd gathered over 18 months would be enough to dismantle the entire corruption ring, bringing justice for Trevor and countless other victims. But more importantly, it had brought healing to 3 broken souls who'd found each other in a Colorado snowstorm. 6 months later, Carter stood in the same spot where he'd first found Joanna's wrecked patrol car, Rex at his side, and Benny throwing snowballs in the distance. The bridge had been repaired. The snow had melted and returned with the seasons, but the changes in their lives remained profound and permanent. Rex no longer trembled at the sound of sirens. Instead, his tail wagged with pride when Joanna's FBI vehicle pulled into their driveway each Friday evening. "Think she'll stay this time?" Benny asked, appearing at Carter's elbow with snow in his hair and hope in his voice. Joanna had accepted a permanent position with the Denver FBI office, close enough to be part of their lives, but far enough away to maintain her independence. Rex looked up at Carter with the same question in his intelligent eyes, the dog's entire body language speaking of contentment, mixed with gentle anticipation. "I think she's already stayed, buddy, in all the ways that matter." Carter ruffled his son's hair and started walking back toward the house, where warm light spilled from the windows, and the smell of Joanna's famous chili waited to welcome them home. Rex trotted beside them, no longer the broken, traumatized animal Carter had rescued from the shelter, but a confident protector who'd found his purpose again. Behind them, snow began to fall once more, covering their footprints and the memories of that violent day when their lives had changed forever. But this time the snow felt different, peaceful rather than ominous, a gentle blessing on the family they'd built from the ashes of their separate griefs. Rex barked once at the falling flakes, then bounded ahead toward home, toward the people who'd given him a second chance at love and belonging. In the distance, Joanna's laughter carried on the cold air as she and Benny built a snowman in the front yard, their voices blending in harmony with Rex's joyful barking. Carter stood watching them for a moment, remembering another winter when loss had seemed insurmountable and the future had felt as cold and empty as a Colorado blizzard. Sometimes the most important rescues, he thought, happened when you weren't even looking for something to save. The snow continued falling, soft and steady, covering everything in fresh white promise. Rex ran circles around his family, finally and completely home.